Is Persona 3 Reload better than Persona 3? It's a good question, but before I even begin to answer that, I want to ask you a question. Namely, how dare you? How dare you ask this of me? Do you understand the magnitude of what you're asking? Okay, so first of all, the point of comparison is a little uneven since there are three versions of the original. There's Persona 3, Persona 3 FES, and Persona 3 Portable, all with their own discrete differences. So when you ask me, is Persona 3 Reload better than Persona 3, you're also asking me to decide what version of the original Persona 3 is the definitive best one to compare against Reload. So, like a good journalist, I did my research, and over the course of the last year, played front to back all three versions of the original Persona 3. I'm just fucking with you. I did not do that. I do not have the time. And anyone who genuinely thinks I didn't do my homework for this can fight me. Leave a comment. I'll send you my home address. So, I played Persona 3 Portable for this comparison, since it's widely available on all modern consoles, and as a result, is likely the version that people nowadays are playing. Because of that, I think it's the one that Atlus is pushing as the definitive version of the original, but I know that some fans definitely disagree. The other reason why this comparison is so tough to make is because Persona games are huge. For full disclosure, I haven't finished Persona 3 Reload yet, and I haven't finished Portable either. While I can understand why some people might think that makes my opinion a little invalid, I'd argue that having played over 40 hours of the remake and 15 of the original means that I've done enough homework to talk about the broad strokes of each game. Now, obviously, I can't speak to the story in its entirety, but that's not really what I'm here to do. Having devoted the past 4 weeks of my life to playing Persona 3, I can definitely say that the original shows its age, which I don't mean as a dig. There are plenty of things that age gracefully and are great. Oh, hey, picture of Linda Cardellini. What are you doing here? That said, it seems like Persona 3 is widely recognized as the first more modern Persona game, and I see why that's the case when looking at gameplay from the first two. However, it's still not quite on the same level of modernity that I found when playing Persona 4 Golden, despite not being that much older than it. I think the biggest difference between Persona 3 Reload and Persona 3 Portable is the presentation, an area where I feel Portable shows its age the most. For the majority of Persona 3 Portable, you're essentially playing a relatively simple visual novel. Nearly all of the scenes consist of still images of characters as they fade in and out depending on who's talking, and any actions that happen during the scene are portrayed through the text at the bottom of the screen. Also, the vast majority of scenes are completely unvoiced, meaning that the game requires a hefty amount of reading. Reload also is a pretty reading-heavy game, however, a lot more of it is fully voiced, such as all of the scenes with confidants and all main interactions with the main cast. Persona 3 Reload takes after Persona 4 and 5 and has 3D models of the characters act out the scene while also having character portraits pop up to show the finer details. Additionally, Persona 3 Portable only gives you control of your character when you're exploring Tartarus, the never-ending Midnight Hour dungeon. For the rest of the game, you're exploring the city by selecting icons on still image map screens. Persona 3 Reload recreates each map almost exactly. However, instead of simply showing you the map.jpg file, you're able to actually explore them by running around each 3D space. These back and forth comparisons are pretty cut and dry and easy to identify by just looking at the footage. However, they pretty drastically change the experience of playing the games. The final piece of that and how they compare in terms of quality is tied to the way that both games handle their UI. Persona 3 Portable has what I would call relatively flashy UI compared to a lot of other JRPGs that came out around it, while Persona 3 Reload creates these huge, lavish, beautifully animated paintings for every single menu in the game. It's clear that UI design has become a huge priority at Atlus, especially after the success and popularity of the kaleidoscopic menus featured in Persona 5. All in all, there's just a lot more to look at with Persona 3 Reload between the flashy UI, the expanded 3D spaces, and the dialogue scenes, but I'd argue that the visual design of the game alters a lot about its feel. Now, this critique is multifaceted, since the visuals impact a lot of different aspects of the game. The first thing I want to address is the pacing. Because the scenes in Persona 3 Portable are, for the most part, just text and character portraits, I found that I was racing through them since I wasn't watching the models, like pantomime at each other, and for the most part, I wasn't listening to the characters talk since there wasn't much spoken dialogue. On top of that, although Portable lacks the flashy transitions between UI elements and gameplay sections, the game just flows much quicker since you aren't waiting on the animations to finish before getting on to whatever the next thing is. Now, that's not to say that the new UI featured in Reload is slow or anything, it's not. There's just a lot of animations that play when you do literally anything. And when you play a game that has a runtime like Persona 3, you start to notice every single small little thing that takes up time. The same can be said for the dialogue scenes. Characters in Persona 3 Reload don't tend to just drone on, and most line readings are pretty quick, but I can read a whole lot faster than it takes for the actors to get their lines out. Now, I could just read ahead and skip the dialogue, but honestly, the vocal performances in Persona 3 Reload are excellent, and I kind of want to hear them. Because of that, however, I found that I was able to cover ground much faster in Persona 3 Portable than I was in Reload. And the same goes for actually exploring the city. In Portable, you're able to quickly get from place to place since you just have to move the cursor to get around, while in Reload, you have to physically run anywhere you want to go. It's cool to explore the halls of Gekkoukan High on the ground, and I think it really adds to the overall sense of place that Persona games are so good at creating, but it is slower than quickly zipping around from a bird's eye view. Persona 3 Reload never feels sluggish. I think the pacing is really solid, but rather that Persona 3 Portable feels fast by comparison. So there's another problem I found with the UI elements as well, outside of the pacing. And before I get to that, I want to say that in a vacuum, I love the UI design and animations from Persona 3 Reload. There's no other way to say that they're just fucking cool. They look great and flow together really nicely. Like, seriously, whoever designed this at Atlas deserves a raise and a vacation. I want to personally send them an edible arrangement. But unfortunately, I think that they clash a little bit with the tone of the story that Persona 3 tells. As I stated before, I haven't finished the game, so I can't speak to its overall conclusions and messaging. But in general, Persona 3 is a pretty somber game that deals with heavy themes. Most of the confidant stories feature characters grappling with devastating loss or dealing with people who abuse them, whether they're yet to process that or not. The main story itself handles similar topics, and the overall imagery that's used with the coffins and blood everywhere portrays a story with some pretty bleak messaging. I mean, this is how you summon your persona. The UI design is incredible, but it's just at odds with what's going on with the characters and narrative. And I can feel some people getting ready to say that it's intentional juxtaposition, but I just don't see that with the way that it's presented. Persona 4 uses juxtaposition like that properly, in my opinion. Look at the way that its animated opening shows shots of the main characters riding on mopeds and dancing around, and then immediately cuts to murder victims. Its presentation intentionally shows imagery with drastically different tones to make you feel something. Reload just doesn't have anything like that. Instead, you're watching flashy animations of like Jack Frost doing a stand-up routine, and then Yukari fucking blasts her head off to summon a demon. Do you know what I mean? Do you see how that clashes a little bit?
Hey, editing Peter here, and I just want to clarify this point a little bit more. The juxtaposition is obviously there in Reload, but the way that it's presented doesn't connect any of the conflicting elements. There are bright, bubbly visuals right next to dark storytelling and imagery, yes, in the same way that Persona 4 does it, but there's no connection that asks you to compare them. It's just a mixed bag of visuals that don't say anything about one another. Anyway, back to it.
Okay, so I don't think that these critiques are a huge deal for most people. Persona 3 Reload works really well on its own, and you're not going to feel the pacing issues I talked about much unless you've played the original game and paid close attention like I have. Reload fits nicely in with the pace of something like Persona 5, which I think was intentional. But I do also think that when it comes to comparing the remake to the original, it's worth talking about. Although Reload is meant to be a pretty beat-for-beat remake of the original game with modern gameplay stylings, I think modernity changes up the feel, and I think that the same goes for the newer art design as well. That said, pacing and art design contradiction issues are subtle differences though, and the place where I think Persona 3 Reload deviates furthest from Portable is with its combat. On a base level, both versions of Persona 3 have the same combat systems. However, Reload leans more towards the stylings of Persona 5 and Persona 5 Royal in that the combat is honestly pretty easy. Now, I'm not here saying that I'm some sort of gaming legend or anything and that it's just all so easy for me. But when each character gets to call in an airstrike every few battles as a super move, like it's Helldivers 2, the combat starts to reduce its difficulty. Fight on, my brothers. I'll be joining you in the fight for democracy once I'm free from my Persona prison. What was I saying? Oh, right. That's not to say that there's no challenge to Persona 3 Reload, since there are optional difficult fights that you can engage with if you're wanting to test your skills, but there are a lot of systems in place to push even the most difficult fights drastically in your favor. Persona 3 Portable, on the other hand, is from an era of gaming where even the most common enemies use a move that I've coined called Bored Now, Fuck You, I Win, which I'm sure you're familiar with. It's when completely out of nowhere, they just wipe your party in a single turn that you couldn't have possibly prepared for. It's brutal, which makes sense given where Persona 3 falls in the lineage of Atlus games. As I'm sure you're aware, the Persona series is a spin-off from the mainline Shin Megami Tensei games. Look, you can see it right there. And you can definitely feel that with the way that the OG P3 handles its difficulty. If you've never played them before, SMT games are hard as nails. They use similar combat mechanics as Persona, but are essentially designed to beat you into the concrete, which you can definitely feel at some points in Persona 3 Portable. Unfortunately, I found that the solution to those really tough fights in P3P was, more often than not, to just grind until I was dealing more damage. And in a game that's already pretty grindy given the never-ending procedurally generated nature of Tartarus, it's not a solution that I find to be particularly compelling. Honestly, the combat sometimes feels like a punishment. And listen, I know there are freaks out there who want that sort of stuff in their games, but there's a difference between a meaty challenge and being punished for just trying to play. On the other hand, though, I do feel like, in general, the weight of the choices you make in Persona 3 Portable's combat matters more than the ones you make in Reload. There will always be some sort of that old school Shin Megami Tensei challenge to at least some parts of the Persona series, but that seems to be sanded off a lot of the newer entries. With Portable, you have to be paying attention, even in the smaller fights, otherwise you'll get totally cooked. While I'd say that I broadly like Reload's approach to combat more with the way that it creates team synergy off of consecutive, well-placed attacks, I do really like the fact that Portable asks you to completely engage with its mechanics or risk major setback. The final giant point of comparison between P3R and P3P is the protagonist. In Persona 3 Portable, you're able to choose the gender of your protagonist, which changes the social links around and reworks the story in some small ways. It's a pretty cool addition to the game that's completely absent from the remake, which is a shame. A lot of women feel pretty left out from recent Persona games with the fact that they all exclusively star men, and it kind of feels like Persona 3 Reload missed a super easy win on that front. Before we answer the question about which game is better, I want to do a quick lightning round of things that I didn't really know where to address. So here we go. As I said before, I really like the vocal performances in Persona 3 Reload, but I very much dislike them in Portable. I know that a lot of people love the original cast or whatever, so maybe this is controversial, but it felt like so many characters felt like they were just reading lines from a sheet of paper. Like, listen to this.
Let's not jump to any conclusions.
So there's that. I also, for the most part, really don't like the character portraits in Portable either. Maybe it's the eyes, or like the way that everyone's skin is so pale and sickly looking. Some of the portraits are fine enough, like Junpei, but my absolute least favorite one is the protagonist, and he's just there all the time when you're spending your time out and about. He's so upsetting to look at. Why did they make him like that? It's like he's melting in front of me or something. What happened to his face? So, is Persona 3 Reload better than Persona 3? Even though I have something of a laundry list of things that I prefer about the original, I still think I like Reload more. A twist, I know. Obviously, there's a lot of merit to Persona 3 Portable, and it's worth playing if you want an old school Persona experience that feels closer to the Shin Megami Tensei series. But I really like the vibrant visuals and stellar voice performances and synergistic combat in Reload. It's got this energy to it that I really like, and, you know, maybe that's because I'm such a fan of Persona 5, and Reload feels like more of that, with a bit of a new spin to it. What I really like doing about this series, however, is that I get to revisit older games and see the seeds of where certain ideas come from in a remake, and Persona 3 Portable is full of those ideas. It's a little more unrefined and raw than I prefer, but it's always cool to cut a series open like it's a tree and see the rings of its life. At the end of the day, I think this comparison really comes down to taste over objective quality. But I mean, what even is objective quality? It doesn't exist. So if you want that old school JRPG goodness, then Persona 3 Portable is the way to go. But if you want a modern flavor, you're not going to find anything that tastes better than Reload. Now, get out of here. And never make me play anything this long with such little time again. I want to enjoy these games. Like and subscribe.